Hello and welcome to my podcast. My name is Peter Doherty. I'm a Catholic priest and a psychologist who integrates my training in psychology and scripture studies to help understand the Gospels from a psychological perspective and seek out new pastoral teachings for Christians in these modern times. My podcasts are usually between 7 to 10 minutes in length, where I share insights and reflections that I hope will be useful to you. Please don't hesitate to contact me with questions or comments. I always love to hear from my listeners. Today's podcast is from Mark chapter 7, verse 31 to 37. This gospel will be read in churches September the 8th, 2024. In today's gospel, we have a description of a healing, specifically the healing of a deaf and mute man. Jesus orders the people witnessing the healing not to tell anyone, but Jesus' orders falls on deaf ears, if you don't mind the irony and pun, and the miracle is proclaimed anyway. As expected, Jesus is attracting large crowds. Most people are not searching for spiritual wisdom, but looking to witness a miracle and perhaps a healing for themselves or a family member or friend. Jesus must have known that the miracle would be proclaimed and the people could not keep a secret. Jesus probably couldn't help himself. He is a healer. Not only would this man regain his hearing and ability to speak, he would also become an active member of his community. He would have opportunities that had been previously denied him. He would be taken more seriously by his community because he would have more access to knowledge, and he'd be able to share his ideas with greater ease. Jesus not only healed him, he restored him. Some researchers claim that being deaf is more isolating than blindness. Not everyone will agree, but I propose that losing one's hearing is one of the biggest losses of getting older. In an article published in June 2009 in the Ear and Hearing, the official journal of the American Auditory Society, researchers found that for each decimal decrease in hearing perception, the odds of developing severe loneliness increased by 7%. One does not have to be totally deaf to experience the negative aspects of being deaf. Unlike many other healings, we do not have any dialogue. We have no idea who this guy is or what is to happen next. Perhaps what is most important is that the man was healed and restored. This is the only healing of a deaf person described in the Gospels. We have an account in Matthew chapter 11, verse 5, where Jesus says, "Let the deaf hear." Likely, there were more healings of deaf people. I know Mark is the shortest of the Gospels, and this story is very brief. There are many points I want to draw your attention to. It seems that people recognize that Jesus is performing a miracle. However, there is no lengthy questioning or plans to make Jesus king. There is nothing. Well, not exactly. We have Jesus taking the man away from the crowd. He doesn't say anything to the man. It makes sense as the man is deaf. Mark describes several actions. He put his fingers in the man's ears. He touches the man's tongue. He looks up to heaven. It has been pointed out that Jesus was communicating with the man in the only way possible, through sign language. Jesus wants him to understand as much as possible in a way that the man could. The deaf man comes out of nowhere, and after regaining his hearing, he disappears. He's from the Decapolis. This is a region in Palestine. There's a mixture of people. The largest group was Greek, not Jewish. So we have little insight into his background or what happened next. Likely the man knew little about Jesus. He did not come on his own. He is led there by the people of the Decapolis. He may not have been a Jew. It's important to note that Jesus is willing to cure him, and Jesus makes the attempt to communicate with him in his own language. We learn from this gospel of the desire of Jesus to be a source of healing. I want to point out that healing takes place on several levels. Research on abuse has highlighted different dimensions of areas that need healing. For example, research has focused on physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and spiritual abuse. There are likely even more dimensions. To be more specific, let me give you an example of research in the various forms of abuse. In 2019, Heather L. Day researched emotional, sexual, and physical abuse. Marlene Winell coined the term religious trauma syndrome in 2011. As I mentioned, these are only two of the many researchers. My point is that when we talk about healings, we'll have a greater understanding if we see different dimensions of the healing. Let me give you an example. Someone who was assaulted likely has physical wounds, but has also experienced emotional and psychological abuse as well. Their emotional wounds may last much longer, while their physical wounds may heal much sooner. People tend to focus on the physical healings because you can see them. In Mark chapter 2, verse 10 and 11, Jesus acknowledges this and states that he physically healed the paralytic to show that he can forgive sins, spiritual healing. Let me ask you, what do you think is more useful, forgiveness of one's sins or a physical healing? Coming back to the gospel, we have the physical healing. The man regains his hearing. But there's also the healing on the community level, where the man is restored to his family and community. There's also the emotional wound of all those years the man was excluded from family because he could not hear them. This healing may take several years. There's also the possibility of spiritual healing, as the man reflects on his healing and how his life has been changed forever because he met Jesus. I am not saying every healing will encompass all of the above dimensions, but likely a few dimensions are involved in every wound. Those different dimensions may heal at different rates. Thank you for listening. I invite you to join me next week when I examine the Gospel of Mark, who describes Jesus teaching the people what it means to live their faith. If this is the first time you've heard my podcast and you're interested in hearing more, I urge you to listen to my podcasts listed on the website. Every Sunday, I release a new podcast focusing on the gospel for the following week. I have to admit, this episode is an exception, as I was having technical difficulties and traveling at the same time, so hence I'm only releasing this podcast today, Wednesday. Usually, however, Sunday afternoon, I release a new podcast. I invite you to listen to all my podcasts, and I hope the reflections are useful to you. The podcast, A Psychologist Looks at Scripture, is found in most of the platforms that carry podcasts. The podcast is also available on YouTube. Please do not hesitate to leave a review. Feedback from my listeners can be helpful in the development of the podcast. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank my team, Heather Patel-Doherty and Richard Coulombe, who play an important part in the preparation of this podcast. If you have any questions or concerns, I can be reached by email at peter.doherty, O-M-I, that is DOHERTYOMI, @gmail.com. God bless, have a great week, and take care.